All right, today we're going to unpack a single chapter in the book of Matthew, chapter 18. And let me tell you, this isn't just a random collection of verses. It's basically a masterclass on how to build a community, what true leadership looks like, and what it really means to live in this upside-down kingdom.
So the whole thing kicks off with a really revealing question from Jesus' disciples. They come right up to him and ask, "So, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Now you got to understand, this wasn't just them being curious. In their world, status and hierarchy were everything. They were basically asking, "Hey Jesus, what's the new org chart look like? Who's the CEO? Who gets to be a VP?"
You can just imagine them, right? All leaning in, expecting him to point to Peter, or maybe James and John. They wanted a power ranking. But what Jesus does next? Well, nobody saw it coming. It completely shatters all their ideas about power and greatness.
So what's his big, dramatic answer? Does he give a long speech? Nope. He just calls over a little kid who's probably just playing in the dirt nearby. And he puts this child right in the middle of all of them. These grown, ambitious men, all jockeying for position.
And this is where it gets really powerful. The Greek word used here is paidion, which means a toddler, a very small child. You have to understand, in the ancient world, a child had literally zero social status, no rights, no power, no voice. They were at the absolute bottom of the social ladder, a non-person. And this is who Jesus holds up as the poster child for greatness. It's just mind-blowing.
So the point couldn't be clear. He basically says, unless you change and become like this child, humble, trusting, not obsessed with your own importance, you won't even get in the kingdom, let alone be great in it. The big takeaway is that in his kingdom, the path up is actually the path down. Greatness starts with becoming small. Okay, so this whole childlike humility thing isn't just some nice abstract idea. Jesus immediately shows them what it looks like in the real world. He gives them a practical guide for how this new kind of community is supposed to work. And it really comes down to 3 core principles. So what are they? First, you fiercely, and I mean fiercely, protect the vulnerable, the little ones in the community. Second, you go after anyone who gets lost, no matter what. And third, you have a clear, step-by-step way to fix things when relationships break down.
And on that first point, he does not mess around. The image he uses is terrifyingly specific. He talks about a milos onikos. That's a massive millstone, the kind turned by a donkey, weighing hundreds and hundreds of pounds. He says it would be better to have that tied around your neck and be thrown into the sea than to cause one of these vulnerable people to lose their way. That's just how seriously God takes this stuff.
And he tells this little story about a shepherd. Now think about this from a business perspective, right? No sane person would risk 99% of their assets to go find 1% that's missing. It's just bad math, but that's the whole point. God's love runs on a totally different kind of math. Every single person has infinite value and is worth leaving everything for it to go and find.
And when it comes to conflict, wow, he gives this incredibly wise step-by-step process. You always start small, private, just one-on-one. If that doesn't work, okay, you bring in 1 or 2 others. It only becomes a community issue as an absolute last resort. And notice the goal here. It's never about public shaming or winning an argument. It's always about restoration. So, all of this teaching about humility and community, it all leads to this incredible climax, this ultimate test case. And it's set off by another question, this time from Peter.
Peter steps up, and you can almost hear him thinking he's being super generous. He asks, "Lord, should I forgive someone like 7 times?" And Jesus' answer is just legendary. Not 7 times, but 77 times. And he's not giving a new number to keep track of. The point is to throw out the calculator altogether. Forgiveness isn't about keeping score. It's about a fundamental posture of the heart.
To really drive this idea home, he tells a story. It's about a king who's settling his accounts, and this one servant is brought in who owes an absolutely insane amount of money, 10,000 talents. So what is 10,000 talents? Well, get this. 1 talent was about 20 years' worth of wages for a common laborer. So we're talking about a debt so massive it's basically unpayable. In today's money, it would be billions of dollars. It's an intentionally absurd number. The point is that there is no way, in 1,000,000 lifetimes, this guy could ever pay it back. So the servant begs for mercy, and the king, out of pure compassion, does something stunning. He cancels the entire debt. Billions of dollars, just
Gone. But then, that same servant, fresh off of being forgiven an impossible debt, goes and finds a coworker who owes him a much, much smaller amount, 100 denarii. Okay, so a denarius was about a day's wage. 100 denarii, we're talking maybe 3 or 4 months' pay. A few $1,000s. Look, it's not nothing, but compared to the billions he was just forgiven, it's pocket change. It's a rounding error.
And that is the punchline of the whole story. This man, who was forgiven an infinite, unpayable debt, turns around and refuses to forgive a finite, manageable one. Jesus is drawing this incredibly stark contrast. The grace we've received from God is like that billion-dollar debt, immeasurable. The offenses we hold against each other, they're like the few $1,000s. How can we, who've been forgiven so much, refuse to forgive so little?
So when we zoom out and look at this entire chapter, what's the big idea that ties it all together? It's a complete and total redefinition of what it means to be great.
I think this quote from one of the commentaries we used just nails it. It says, "True greatness isn't about building platforms, it's about building people, especially the ones society overlooks." The message of this entire chapter is that in this upside-down kingdom, you don't find significance by climbing the ladder of power and status. You find it by going lower, by serving, by protecting the vulnerable, by pursuing the lost, and by giving the same radical, score-free forgiveness that you've been given. It's not about climbing ladders, it's about washing feet.
And that really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In our own lives, in our families, our workplaces, our communities, what would actually change if we started valuing humility more than status? If we really treated forgiveness not as a transaction, but as a way of life that has simply stopped keeping score, what would that look like?